All right, welcome everybody to the Proctored test strategy session. I have a question about game 2 from Test J. So I'm gonna walk you through that one. If you have questions anytime during this game, something you don't understand, please raise your hand. This is a strategy session for you, and this is mimicking the way that our classes work. I, as an instructor, really love a back and forth, and I really love to see cameras on. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'll answer. We're going to take a very basic approach to this one. So the way we always start with any game is by reading through this passage together. I'm going to give you my thoughts as I read it, kind of show you how it's taken shape in my brain, and then we'll go through the rules and see the best way we could make worlds on the board behind us. Sound good? Awesome. Okay, so Test J Game 2 Film Festival sounds really fun. The prompt starts out by saying, exactly 3 films, Greed, Harvest, and Limelight, are shown during a film club festival held on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We've got some stuff we're keeping track of. So for me, I like to start putting a little bit of shape to this already, just so I don't get lost. Putting some shape to it at the beginning by putting some things on the board also helps me as I go forward, when I read rules, kind of figure out what they might look like on the shape that we're building together. So I know I've got a Thursday, a Friday, a Saturday, and I have 3 films, Greed, Harvest, and Limelight. So I'm going to dot those here. So what I'm curious about already, and something I'm looking for in the passage, is anything that shows me the number that will be per day. I have days. I can assume, since it's a film festival and we're having something that day, that at least 1 is shown. But I feel like the number of films per day is going to be important. So that's something I'm desperately seeking as I read. As of now, this is what I can take from that first sentence. Okay. Each film is shown at least once during the festival. Okay, so we got to play all these. G, H, and L have to get used. But never more than once on a given day. That makes sense. That would be a really boring film festival if it was the same film 3 times on the same day. Okay, so that means the most I could have on a given day would be 3. That would be all the films with no repeats shown on a day. That's my upper end. So I'm going to go ahead and put that here so I don't lose that thought. The most I could have here is 3 on this day. I feel like that top row is going to be a little too small. Now, I don't know that there's guaranteed 3 on each day. So sometimes what I'll do instead is I will write some dotted lines until I get some clarity on rules. But sometimes thinking of upper limits is really helpful. Okay, so at this point, I know if I read a rule, I'm going to be able to put it on the shape that I put on the board behind me. First one says, on Thursday, Harvest is shown, and no film is shown after it on that day. This is the last one. That makes sense. So if I have 1 film on Thursday, it's Harvest. If I have 2 films, Harvest is shown last. If I have 3 films, Harvest is shown last. It's just always got to be last. It shuts the house down on Thursday. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and write Harvest in this last spot on Thursday. Again, that doesn't mean that there's 2 above, but it means there's nothing that can come after Harvest. That's the showstopper. It's the end. Kind of a freebie. We love that. Okay, on Friday, either Greed or Limelight, but not both, is shown, and no film is shown after it that day. Well, that seems familiar. That's just like how we figured out Harvest is probably going to be safest right on this last spot. But I have either Greed or Limelight, but not both. So I can only have one of those that day. The other is gone. So on Friday, what I will do is I will write Greed or Limelight is here on Friday. Now there's an important inference we can make if we stop here. So on this day, I know harvest is on the caboose. I don't have anything that's prohibited from going in this day. I just know harvest is last. On this day, I've got an either or. It's either greed or it's limelight. And I only have 3 variables total. I know I can only have 2 of these. So on this day, there's no way I could have 3 because having 3 films would mean we'd need a repeat. I can't have a repeat based on the passage. So I'm going to change this here to just having 2 spots, the most I could have there. And we can tell already, if I have one here, it's not going to be the other G or L. That really narrows it down. Okay, last rule here. On Saturday, either greed or harvest, but not both, is shown, and no film is shown after it. Awesome. We can use the same thought process we had on the previous day, Friday, apply it to Saturday. Except this time, I'm going to write G/H. Okay. For the same reason, we can tell there can only be 2 on this day. All right. So on this day, Thursday, we have the possibility of 3 movies. All 3 could be shown, just important that H is at the end. On Friday, I've got either G or I've got L in that last spot. And then the only one who could go here would be H, right? It's either G or L. So if I have 2, it's got to be H. Okay. This one, either or, G or H. So if I've got 2, this one has to be the only other variable, which is L. Again, this being in parentheses means this doesn't have to be there. I don't have to have 2 films shown that day. But if I do, if a question tells me if 2 films are on Friday, then I know H has to be one of them because these ones can't play together on that day. Here on this day, if I have 3 on Thursday, I can have L, I can have G, right? And either one of those can move back and forth. So L could be the second of 2, G could be the second of 2. And that's really our setup for this game. The way that we look at worlds at LSAT Demon is by going rule by rule by rule by rule. The same way that I made inferences in this game, applying the rules one at a time, is the same way we do it in other games. This one is a game that ends up being pretty flexible in our diagram. There's some variability in the number of spaces, but using this diagram, this world that I made here, all the rules on the page are now gone. Every single one of them is eliminated. There's not a single rule that I have to look back to ever again because all of them are represented in this diagram. Anything that's possible in this game is on the board behind me. So questions then are going to ask me to go into specific parts of my diagram. So it might say if greed is on Friday or if harvest is on Saturday. I've got that on the board behind me. I just have to find it. It might ask for things that must be true. So if H is on Friday, what must be true? Well, I can fill that in. I can tell things that have to be in place from there. A lot of people, instead of making worlds like this one that have the rules baked in, continue on creating scenarios one at a time. Scenarios are things that are possible in the game. So a scenario would be, okay, I'm going to write down G and F and then fill the rest. I'm going to write down L and F and then fill the rest. And then I've got to add G could be an S and fill the rest. That is not the way to approach logic games most times. If specific questions ask us to go in and do that, we can do it. But here in this diagram, I'm confident we have enough information to completely annihilate this game. And if we do some additional games, we'll see how this method can carry forward. But somebody asked for the setup on this one. That's the way I would set it up. Any other questions on this game? Questions about worlds or how we do LG at LSAT Demon? Quiet group today. I must be really intimidating. Did anybody have difficulty with Test J game 4 or 3? Maybe we can put that one up. Okay, I see a game 4. Let's go ahead and do it. Let me pull it up really quick. I will drop it in chat for you. Okay, I see game 4 and then game 1. We can do both of those. Okay, so we're going to start with Test J game 4 here. There it is in chat for anyone who wants to read along with us. I'm going to go ahead and erase this one. Okay. So like before, we're going to read through this prompt together and see what we learn. There are exactly 3 recycling centers in Rivertown. Center 1, Center 2, Center 3. Tells me that Rivertown did not have enough wealthy donors to name these recycling centers, because that is really not creative at all. I'm going to go ahead and write some on the board just so I can keep it square in my head. I'm going to have 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Exactly 5 kinds of material are recycled at these recycling centers: glass, newsprint, plastic, tin, and wood. All right, a bit of a longer list. I'm definitely going to jot it down. So glass, newsprint, plastic, tin, wood. Okay. Whenever we get a setup like this, the first thing I'm thinking in my head is, okay, I've got some buckets I have to put things in. I have 5 things I have to put in there. The thing that I'm most concerned about is trying to figure out the number that can go in each one. That's what I'm really trying to suss out in this game, and what I can tell is going to be important. So let's go through this prompt together and see if we can find it. Each recycling center recycles at least 2, but no more than 3 of these kinds of material. Okay, that gives us something to work with. The way that I would represent this is 2 solid lines under each. That says must be 2. I have to fill those spaces. On this last one, I'm going to make a dotted line here. It's possible we might have a 3rd one in that recycling center. Not guaranteed, but I want to show that that possibility is there. I can never have 4. So this is my limit. Awesome. Okay. Any recycling center that recycles wood also recycles newsprint. All right. This is a good example of interpreting rules and making sure we're not going to misinterpret. So this says if wood, so if I have wood, then that's what this arrow would mean. In this game, I would have wood and newsprint. And I orient it this way with W on top of N, because that's the way I'm going to show it on the board behind me with how I've done this setup. So if W, then WN. Sometimes students will misinterpret this rule and think every time you have an N, that you also have to have a W. But that is a mistake in interpreting these rules that students do commonly. Anytime we have an if rule, we can think of it like a light switch. If this first half isn't met, so if W, if I don't have a W and that's crossed out, then this rule doesn't exist. There's nothing about it that can be triggered. It does not exist. This rule only exists if that if condition is met. So why is that useful? Because that tells me I can have N in this game without necessarily having W. But I cannot, because of this rule, have a W without having an N. So that's something that helps give me some shape to this game. I'm going to have a WN block at least. Those are stuck together. Awesome. Every kind of material that center 2 recycles is also recycled at center 1. Interesting. Okay. The way that I might represent this is by kind of drawing an arrow this way. Anything that I have in 2 goes that way. Just like before, that does not mean anything we have at 1 has to be over here. So if we're imagining a scenario where, let's say 2 had G and 2 had N, I don't know if this is possible yet or not. That tells me here, I've got G and N. But say 2 only has 2 spaces, then I could have W here that wouldn't be at 2, because this is a one-way relationship. 2 is dumping down to 1, not the other way around. So again, we have to be careful when we read these rules to make sure we're interpreting them accurately. That's the way I'd represent it on my board. Then our last rule here says only one of the recycling centers recycles plastic. Okay, so I have 1 plastic. And that recycling center does not recycle glass. Okay. So this seems like a pretty important rule. Anytime we limit our variable set, saying there's only one of something, figuring out where that one thing goes can end up being pretty important. On top of that, we have a relationship here, which means that if I have P somewhere, I cannot have G. Impossible. So that tells me that looking at 3 centers here, I have to have one that has P and one that has G, and there's no overlap. So to me, it feels like a large part of this game is going to be figuring out where my P goes and where my G goes. Every single one of these recycling materials has to be recycled. Exactly 5 kinds are recycled, it says, which means we have to find a way for everything to get used. When we have rules like that that limit our set of possibilities, we want to hone in. This is how we make worlds. We find a rule like that that is very determinative, really picky. It doesn't play well with others. We find all the places it can go. After that, we apply the rest of the rules one by one. So let's look at this P and G rule. I've got 1 P. I can never have more than 1 P. There's only 1. That tells me something about where it can go already. If I put a P in recycling center 2, for example, well, what would that mean? That would mean that in recycling center 1, I'd have to have a P. That's a problem. I've only got 1 P. So just looking at the way we set up this board, we've eliminated the possibility for P to go into 2. That leaves me with only 2 possibilities at this point. That I have a P in recycling center 3, or that I have a P in recycling center 1. With those, we can start to imagine how worlds would be created. So let's watch. I'm going to create worlds on the basis of where P can go in this one. We'll see from there if we have to split further, if we have to add more. But I'm going to start with baby steps one at a time. So it's possible for P to go on 3. No issues there. But it's also possible for P to go on 1. So I am going to split this world so I can capture that possibility. When we split, we want to copy down everything exactly. My biggest issue is always keeping things sized appropriately. So apologies to anybody who's better with the marker than me. I want to copy down all of the inferences I made here. And I even want to copy the dotted lines here so I don't get in trouble. Okay. Also possible for me to have P in 1. I'm going to write this down here and you'll see why in a sec. So we have that rule that says anything that's in 2 has to be in 1. What this tells me, if I have P in 1, then I cannot have 3 variables in 2. Because if I have 3 variables in 2, this would have to be a P. I can't have 2 Ps. So if I have P in 1, that means I only have 2 variables in 2. Awesome. Okay. The other thing that I have to remember is with this rule, the recycling center that I put P in does not do G. So in this one, we don't have G as well. I still need to find ways to recycle G because the passage told me exactly 5 are recycled. So what we do from here is we start applying the other rules one by one through the game to fill out these worlds. Sometimes that means we have to split and add more, but we always split with purpose and based on a rule, not just to create a viable scenario. So we have some other things left in this game that we have to figure out where they can go. Really, we should start by talking about G. So G can't be in the center with P. The other variables that I have are Wn and T. I don't really have any floaters, or sorry, any rules about T whatsoever, which means it's really a floater. So far in this game, I've taken P out of the equation. That's the only places it can go. We've eliminated a variable and that last rule. So I have to figure out how to use W, N, T, and G here. There are some rules about G. So let's look at G for a sec. Let's start with this world over here. So with P in 3, I know that I can't have G here at all. Okay, so if I have G, I could either have G on 2, which would take it over to 1. So that's a possibility I can write down already. So G and then G, that's something we can see with that relationship. But just like it was possible to put P down here without putting P in 2, that same thought process leads me to believe it's probably possible to put G in 1 without having G in 2. So I need to split again. When I split, I'm going to copy down my world exactly just like I did before. Okay, that arrow's going over so I don't get in trouble. We've got P in 3 on this world. Now I'm going to see what happens if I put G over here. Great. Okay, so with the same understanding we made over here, if I'm trying to figure out what happens if there's one G that's only in 1, because this is the world where I'm figuring out what happens if there's a G in both, I can make that same understanding that 2, recycling center 2, can only have 2 spaces. So I can erase this already. Sometimes when we make one understanding in a world, it carries through to others. Perfect. Let's look at this last world over here. I'm going to erase some of these guys because I feel like you all understand them and you'll catch me if I'm wrong. Let's see where G can go in this one. This is our P is in 1 world. So that tells me I can't have G in 1 because that would violate our plastic glass rule. I can't have G in 2 for that same reason. That would put a G in 1. So the only place I can have a G in this world is in 3. Everybody following so far? Does this make sense? Seem okay? Awesome. So with that, we've eliminated G as a variable. Every place G can go, we've solved. We've got it on our map here. There's no other way that G could go somewhere that we don't have on our board behind us. That leaves us with a couple things here. We have our WN rule. So if W, then WN. We also have to find a way to use T. That gives me some more stuff to play with in this game. Let's look at this WN block and how it can affect these skeletons a little bit. So let's say, for example, just in this first world here, where P is in 3, so glass has to be in 2 and 1, then I want to put WN in 2. That's a spot where it can go. So that would mean that here, WN would have to go in 1. Okay? I still have to use a T. So if I have W in 2 on this world, well, I have to have T in 3. Does everyone understand why that's the case? If I have W, I have to have N. In this world, we determined that P is on 3, G can go on 2, so this is filling up our slots. If I put a W on 3, that would mean that I have no space for T to go. So down here, I could have N, and that could work. I don't have to, but I know no matter what, I have to have T. Does that make sense to everybody? Following? Okay, let's look at this world next, and then we'll come back to this one as well. So using the same WN, it would be possible in the same way for me to have WN here, then WN here, that copies. Same understanding. I'd have to have T there, and then I could have N, right? But let's use this world as another case study here. So I'm going to erase these. It would be possible for me to have WN on 3. And it would be possible for me to have T on 2. I just have to make sure everybody gets recycled, which means I kind of need to split again in this world to represent the full flexibility of how things can go. So let's split here. So I'm going to call this world 1, world 2, world 3, and 3A here. So I'm going to copy down briefly what I had in this world, P and then G here. Okay, so if I have T going into 2, that tells me I have to have T in 1. That's something that can happen. What can we deduce about the other variables in this game? If I were to put W here in 2, we might have a problem. W brings in N. I'm supposed to copy everything over. So if I put W here, I ran into a problem. I already have G in 1 in this world. That tells us that W can't be in 2 in this setup. Every recycling center recycles at least 2. So if I have T here, I have to have N here. N copies over, I have to have N here. I still need to burn wood. Has to get recycled. Burn is probably a bad word. It's getting recycled. The only place that can go is here in 3. W brings N along. And so it would be there. Makes sense? So here could be possible, potentially. Oh, actually, no, because that would be that world up there. Sorry. We have the same point of understanding we have to make here. We've got this G and W up here, and we've got tin that we could burn in this world as well. So in this world, if I were splitting again, let me reorient things a little bit. Sorry, everybody. Small whiteboard because I'm traveling. So if we had the same world where we have P in 3 and then G here, forcing G over. Let's see what happens if we put a T here. Well, I can tell right away that I have to have a T here. Okay. And then in this world, I still have to burn my W The only place that can happen is here because of that same rule. So that would mean 3 would have to have W and N. Now it would be totally possible for me to have N here. No issues with that. It'd be totally possible for me to have N here. I just have to make sure that if I put N in 2, that it carries over to 1, right? Okay. Awesome, awesome. Let's knock out this last world here. So in this one, I have G in 3, which forced my P to recycling center 1. I still have the same issue with the WN block and then 10. This is kind of the same process repeating itself a little bit. So at this point, when I'm making worlds, I kind of make a choice that I can have 10 here, right? Or I can have W here. And anything in 2 copies over to 1. That's something we've been doing this whole time. 2 also has to have 2 things recycled in it regardless. The only other variable I have that could go in 2 is an N. I can't have P there because that would be more than 1 P. I can't have G there because that would force a G in recycling center 1. Okay, so we have a relationship here where we just have kind of a swap between W and T in our worlds. That's what we've been splitting on in each one of these. We either have W in 2, which brings in N, forces it over here, or we have T in this world, which puts T in recycling center 1 here. So I'm going to leave this last world a little bit flexible just to kind of show you how things can kind of flow in these games if you do so. This one, we can make the other understanding that the second variable over here would have to be N. But this would be my setup for game 4 of this one. It's a little bit more complicated. It is a level 4 game, and I definitely didn't orient my whiteboard in the same way or the best way here. I can write that this is kind of 1A world. But we found out at the end that using P, figuring out where P has to go, and then that relationship between the T recycling center and the WN block that has to move really gave shape to the rest of our worlds here. Question, Viviana.
Hi, thank you for all of this. And of course, this will be the best way to go about it, right? Creating all the worlds, although of course it was much lengthier than the first one, but it's the best approach, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, and so what this allows us to do is all the work at the beginning. And the reason why it's important that we do this is on every single logic game, it will have questions that say what could be true, what must be true. In all of those, you have to be able to look at every single possibility as a whole to answer it correctly, unless you're just super good at making a deduction and kind of lucky across all of your games. So to answer those, which are present in every single game, we have to take kind of a top-down approach. We have to do all the work at the beginning, making these understandings, these connections one by one, bit by bit, so that when we get to the questions go incredibly fast. So when I get to questions in LG, I will answer the full section of questions in like a minute or a minute and a half, because all I have to do is look behind me. So if it says things like if P is in recycling center 3, well, that orients me. I have to look at this world and this world, this world, and this world, right? I'm not looking at this world up here, not what's happening. So then I just have to orient to all the work I already did, and I can see the full possibilities of the entire game. That's why doing the work at the beginning will actually make you go faster, even though it seems like a pretty slow process at the beginning. And not only will it make you faster, it will make you more accurate, which is really what we care about. When we answer a question, we know it's right.
Thank you.
Any other questions about this one or the test in general, test strategy in general? I kind of want this session to be whatever you'd like it to be. If not, we can probably knock out game 1 really quick. I saw Lauren put that in chat. Might be a breath of fresh air after doing a game 4 potentially. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and queue up game 1. Please, team, if you've got questions, there are no bad ones at this stage. I started, like all of you, kind of feeling like I was a little bit in over my head and that logic games were like an arcane thing that I would never ever figure out. And now I teach LG classes at the Demon, LG Foundation. So I teach every single Monday what games that are a little bit simpler than that one sometimes, how to really make them approachable and discreet. All right, so I'm going to pull up game 1 here. Product codes. Okay, so there's that one if you want to pull it up. All right, this one says, a company employee generates a series of 5-digit product codes in accordance with the following rules. Interesting. This one seems a little bit unique in the setup. That doesn't scare us. We can still take the rules they have and put it into a visual representation on the board. So we've got 5 digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Awesome. Great. The codes use the digits 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, no others, rule 1. Each digit occurs exactly once in any code. That makes things a lot more simple, okay? The second digit has a value exactly twice that of the first digit. Aha, okay. That's gonna be a very important nut to crack here. That's gonna limit our options in a way that's gonna be really, really helpful that we'll probably be able to figure out in a sec. Right now, I'm just gonna write, we have X here and 2X here. I don't know if there's a better way to represent it, but that's the way that makes sense in my head. The last rule says the value of the third digit is less than the value of the 5th digit. This is really forcing me to pull out my elementary school math knowledge. Hungry alligator, great. 5 is more than 3. Awesome. We can still make worlds in this game just like the other ones on the basis of these rules. The thing that is going to drive it for me is looking at that 2x to x relationship between space 2 and 1. There's a limited number of variables between 1, 2, 3, and 4 that can be doubled into another variable in this game. So right away, I see it possible for 1 to be here. And then 2 could be 2 times that. Or I can have 4 here and 2 being half of that. So 2, if doubled, would be 4. I can't see any other way to set up this game. If I put 3 here, I would need 6 here. If I put 0 here, I think I would destroy the universe because that would have to be a 0. If I put 1 there, I don't have a half. That's it. We're in 2 worlds here. Any possible code is going to either start 1, 2 or 2, 4. So then we just have this last thing to figure out, that between 3 and 5, 3 has to be less than space 5. That's a really confusing way to say it. Space 3 has to be less than space 5. This one doesn't necessarily have to be number 3. All right, so looking at the variables we have left in this game, we have 3, 4, and 5. And then in this game, oh, and sorry, we don't have 5, we have 0. What am I talking about? We have 0, 3, and 4. And then in this game, we have 0, 1, and 3. Make sense? That's just the variables we have left, not necessarily the order they're in. I just want to put them here so we can kind of orient ourselves. So out of this list, there's one already I can tell could never go here. And that would be 4. 4 is the biggest guy on the block. And so if 4 were here, there's no number that could go here and would be bigger. This could never be 4. So how do I represent that? Right now, I figured out it's can't be 4. We want to figure out ways to turn negative understandings like that into positive rules. Negative understandings and negative rules don't always help us create worlds. So instead of saying can't be 4, What we want to say is could be 0 or 3. See how that's a lot more concrete and actually helps us make some forward momentum here in this game. So we've got two possibilities. I could have 0 or 3 in this one. That kind of makes me want to split into worlds a little bit already. So with those possibilities, I'm going to kind of erase here. And I want to make one world where 0 is on space 3. And then I want to copy this one. This is my 1, 2, and in this world, I want to have 3 here. So the only rule that I have left in this one to manage is that 5, space 5, has to be greater in value than space 3. With the variables that I have left, 3 and 4 in this one, it doesn't seem like I can go wrong. Either one of those could be in 5, and I'd still be happy. Which means I could write 3, 4, and show that flexibility. Doesn't matter which one goes where, as long as it's greater than 3 there, which it would be in this world. Now let's turn to the split we made, the same world, starting with 1, 2, where 3 is on space 3. Well, I can't have 0 on space 5, because 0 is less than 3, which tells me it can only be 4 in this scenario. We love that. That makes this really specific. So to orient ourselves and to practice speaking in the language of worlds as we do an LSAT demon, if I'm in my 1, 2 world here, so my 2 on space 2 world, and I have 3 on space 3, fully solved world. There's only one possibility that can happen. That's 1, 2, 3, 0, 4. Love that. Makes sense. Now, let's look at this bottom world here. Again, from this variable set here that we have left, there's one that I know can't go on space 3. It's the biggest bully left, and that is 3. So that gives me that same split of I could have 0 here again, or I could have 1 here. That makes me want to split. So let's just choose in this world, we will put 0, just like here. We'll split again. This is my 2, 4 world. And here we will put 1. Awesome. Just like before, I have 1 and 3 that are left in this world. Both of those are greater in value than 0. So as we had flexibility up here when 0 is on 3, we have flexibility down here as well. Those can go back and forth. In this one, we have a bit of a challenge with the variables we have left. We have 3 and 0 left in this world. Just like up here, I can't have 0 on space 5 because that is less in value than 1. Looks like we've got to solve the world then. We eliminated a possibility. So here I have to have 3, and that forces 0 into the only spot it can go left. Easy peasy, 4 splits. We've dominated this game. There's nothing you could ask about that we don't have on the board behind us. All we have to do is go into the questions and find it, really. So this is an example of a game that, because it's talking about digits and code numbers, I think a lot of students are like, oh my gosh, this is not like other logic games I've encountered before. It feels totally different. But these could all be letters. It doesn't really matter that it's numbers in a code. All we're doing is applying the rules one by one by one by one into the structure that we create. So what I encounter a lot of times in students that I work with is a little bit of a feeling of being overwhelmed, which can cause decision paralysis. You don't really know where to start. What I always tell them is just start wherever you can, and then apply what you understand from then. I started just by making 5 spaces and writing X and 2X here, and then the greater sign here with a handle. Wonderful. That's one easy step. I'm sure most students could make that step even on their first day of LSAT study. If not, we'll get you there. With this understanding that this had to be double the first space, we just started plugging in numbers, and there's only 2 that worked. Once we figured out those 2 that worked, that told me the first half of the game was done. I only had 3 left. And then with that one rule, it became really simple. Looking at the logic game in an entirety can be exhausting and overwhelming. Take small bites, chew your food before you swallow. And so for me, even if it's a game 1 or a game 4, like you saw before, I'm still just taking baby steps through the whole thing, placing one thing across all my worlds, then placing another thing across all my worlds so I can keep it straight in my head. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions about this one? Any questions about LSAT prep at all? I teach at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern, which means I've got time to hang out and answer any questions you might have about the Demon or LSAT prep in general. I keep commenting on it being a quiet group, but I have to remind myself you just took an LSAT as well. I was pretty sapped taking those when I first began as well.
Since we're quiet, do you mind doing 3?
Sure. Yeah. Let's take a look at 3. Honestly, anybody talking back to me, I'll probably do whatever you say because I was getting worried that my microphone wasn't even working and that you hadn't heard me all day. So
We can start
really
playing Simon
helpful.
Says.
Yeah, we can totally do a setup for game 3.
Thank you.
All right, I will drop that in chat here. Okay. All right, let's read through this passage together. A cruise line is scheduling 7-week-long voyages for the ship Freedom. Each voyage will occur in exactly one of the first 7 weeks of the season. All right, so I'm going to write 7 lines on the board and understand that I'm going to get some clarity on these. I just like to do this early so I can picture it in my head when it's talking about things. I'm also leaving myself room to split if it ends up needing worlds. I also, because I typically read left to right, I won't often number the spaces. If it's helpful to write like a 1 here and a 7 here, that's as far as I would go really on that one. Each voyage will be to one of 4 destinations: Guadalupe, Jamaica, Martinique, or Trinidad. So that's my variable list. I have G and JMT. With 4 variables and 7 spaces, I can tell we have to have repeats, no matter what. We have to. So wonderful. Each voyage will be to exactly one of 4. Oh, I just read that, sorry. Each destination will be scheduled for at least one of the weeks. Everybody's got to be visited. Makes sense. Can't have any variables left off. Following conditions apply. Jamaica will not be its destination in week 4. I don't love negative rules, and we had that conversation, but I'll go ahead and just jot that just as a freebie so we can visualize it as we go on. Trinidad will be the destination in week 7. Love it. More freebies. Excellent. T on 7. Freedom will make exactly 2 voyages to Martinique. This is one that I like to pause on because reading exactly 2 means that I have to have 2 M's. I cannot have 1. I cannot have 3. It's exactly 2 voyages to Martinique. Doesn't change. And at least 1 voyage to Guadalupe will occur in some week between those 2 voyages. Let's figure out how we can represent that. So I know I've got an M, and I've got another M. All this rule tells me is somewhere in between, I have to have a G. What this rule doesn't tell me is the number of spaces, how far apart they can be. For me, with the rules we've encountered so far, this could be satisfied if I had an M here, an M on 6, and a G anywhere in the middle. So this just tells me there has to be an MGM sandwich. So the way that I write that is usually like this. I just have to see 2 M's with a G somewhere in the middle. That's all I can take from this one. If you wrote this rule down in a way that implied a number of spaces or a closer relationship than that, we might have interpreted it to be stronger than this rule actually is. Guadalupe will be its destination in the week preceding any voyage it makes to Jamaica. This is another one that we have to pause and figure out exactly what it means. This one is essentially an if-then rule. And we have to practice being able to pick those up. What this rule is saying is if J, then I have to have GJ on back-to-back spaces. What a lot of students read this to mean is if I have a G, I have to have a J right after. But that is not what this one is saying. This one is saying if I have a J, I have to have a G before. So let's keep practicing that light switch mentality in our head. If I have a J, this rule is here. If I don't have a J, that rule does not exist whatsoever. This is a good example looking at the rule below. So we have this MGM sandwich. There's probably some students that jump to the conclusion that this has to be an MGJ sandwich. But that is misunderstanding the relationship of this rule. This rule is only if J, then GJ. Could it be possible that I have MGJ? Absolutely. There's nothing that prohibits it. But we also have to make the understanding that this can be MGM without a J, still correct by the rules in the game. All right. Our last rule says no destination will be scheduled for consecutive weeks. Sometimes with rules like that, I don't necessarily write them down because I feel like they're things I can hold straight in my head. Just can't have repeats. If you're going to write it down, I would do something like this where you just can't have XX. That's not something that can happen in the game. But for me, some rules like that, I just kind of hold in my head. So we have a couple rules that are live here. We have some inferences that we've made. Our job now is to see what other inferences we can make based on the rules in this game. So I have this G has to come before J rule. I have this no repeat rule. And I have this MGM sandwich. Let's just go bite size and see what we can tell. The only thing we have on the board right now is that T, which tells me right away, well, I can't have a T on space 6 because that would repeat, right? So that's something we can cross out. Lovely. If we're turning that into a positive rule, then that would mean this would have to be M, G, or J, but that gets a little messy. Hopefully I can create some worlds that might eliminate that. But that's all we can take from that one so far. We also have this if J, then GJ rule, which tells me that if I have a J somewhere, I have to have a space before it. So we know already that J doesn't come here. But we can also use that understanding to show that J can't come here. Because if I had a J on space 1, well, I would need a space 0 to have a G here. So that's another inference we can make, that we can't have J on 1 here. This would have to be T or M or G here in that first space. What we're left with then is kind of a board where we have some inferences we've made. We know T is on 7, but this is one where I don't think writing down every viable scenario is something that is helpful because there's so much flexibility in this game. And here's why. When we make worlds, we make it because we have a variable that if we place it somewhere, it tells us about the rest of the variables in the game. That allows us to narrow and focus and specify. Looking at these variables, because of how flexible this rule is, it's really difficult for me to place variables in a way that really eliminates the flexibility in this game. So let's try it. Let's just practice. If I'm looking at, for example, this GJ block is the only thing left that's definite, right? Those are stuck together. They can't move. These ones, really flexible. It would be impossible for me to place this in a way that teaches me anything. There's some places we see GJ can go, other places we see it can't. Let's just see what happens. So if I put a J on that spot, which it can go, that would mean I have a G here. Okay, well, I'd have to split again because there's more spots that J could go. I could also have a J here and a G could go there. Well, I kind of need to split again. I know J can't go there, so I kind of get to skip that one. So if I put J here, I can put a G there. There's only a limited number of inferences I can make in each one of these scenarios. So for this one, you might think, well, this has to be an M because that MGM rule, but not necessarily. You could have all the room to do that MGM rule right here. Or you could do MGM like this. You also have T that can go anywhere except space 6. It's so flexible. So making worlds doesn't necessarily tell us all the things that we need on this one. But I want to give you confidence using this set of inferences and this skeleton here. This is okay to go into questions on a game that we've identified as really flexible. This is where you get real value from going into questions that start with the word if. So do your list question and then start with the questions that say the word if, because that gives us information to create a scenario. So we're not just creating all the scenarios that we want to or can, right? We're creating specific scenarios in this one after eliminating as many rules as we can on our initial skeletons. Let's do this one together really quick, and then I'll have to run. It's really all I have time for. Question 13 says, if Freedom makes a voyage to Trinidad in week 5, which of the following could be true? So looking at week 5 here, that tells me I have a T on 5. Okay. So that also tells me if I'm making some inferences here, I can't have J on 5. So that this space 5, or this, sorry, can't have J on 4. This space 4 here also can't have T, because that would be TT. Can't have that. I also can't have J on space 6, because every J has to have a G before it. So in both of these spaces, I'm looking at either M or G, then M or G. I have to have a JG somewhere. So I need this JG block somewhere. And then the rest of it can kind of be wide open. So we can practice doing some scenarios here if we wanted with this one. There's still a lot of flexibility here in this one. So we're looking at things that could be true. That's what this question is asking for. We've made some inferences. So can't have T here, can't have J here. This has got to be M or G. I still have to have a JG somewhere. The first place that could happen would be here, where if this were G, I could have J, right? So this could potentially be a J, but I've got a lot of wide open things. So I would go into the answer choices, try to plug them in and find things that don't work, doing what I call taking out the trash, using this set of inferences we made to eliminate wrong answers. So question 13A says, Freedom makes a voyage to Trinidad in week 1. All right, well, let's try it. We have Trinidad in week 1 here. Let's see if that is something we can do in our diagram here. So if I had T in week 1, I still need to satisfy this MGM rule. I still need my JG block as well. So I have to figure out if that's something I can still accomplish. So let's play with some JG placements here. Looking at this board, there's only one spot that JG can go, and that's right here. We see that J can't go here, J can't go here, J can't go here. We made that deduction earlier. So I'd have to have JG here. Uh-oh, I don't have enough spaces to do my MGM rule. I could have M, G or MM, but I still don't have that MGM sandwich. So in creating this scenario, I can see that A can't be correct. B here, Freedom makes a voyage to Martinique in week 2. Well, that wouldn't work because of our same JG block. This guy is really picky. So looking at the spaces we could have J, I have to put JG here. Oh, actually, hold on. That
But
could
it's
work,
backwards
right?
though, because it's supposed to be GJ.
Oh, GJ,
Yeah.
you're right. You are so right. This would have to be GJ. That doesn't work. So this gives us a world where we don't have a space that J can go. Thank you so much. Great catch. So we don't have an answer in B. Looking at C, Freedom makes a voyage to Guadalupe in week 3. Let's try it. So looking at our JG rule. Oh, GJ, that's why I was messed up. Oh, GJ. Looking at our GJ rule, I can't have J here, so it can't be here. I would have to have it here. So it'd have to be GJG. I don't have space for my MGM. So in each one of these, we're looking at that block of this GJ, seeing that it really constrains it. Answer choice D, Freedom makes a voyage to Martinique in week 4. That sounds promising. So we have Martinique in week 4. And there's a limited number of spaces where that GJ block can go, but it could go here, it could go here. I know I need that MG rule satisfied. I can't do it on this side, but if I put GJ right here with that M, that rule is satisfied. And this could be really whatever you want it to at this point. All the rules are satisfied. So as long as I don't have a T or a J there, I'm happy. D totally could be true. Awesome. So now that I've created this scenario where I have M, G, J, M, I keep it on my board because this is showing me a scenario from the game that is correct. So you won't be doing it on a whiteboard. You'll be writing down these on your paper. Keep the ones that are correct from these if questions, because as we create those, possible that they're useful on the future questions in the test as well. So unfortunately, I do have to run. I have another class right at 4. Viviana, thanks for participating and everybody else for hanging out. Teresa, unfortunately, we don't have time to do circle slash, and I don't know if we have any circle slash candidates on our free tests, unfortunately. But we did have that free circle slash boot camp that Matt did a couple of weeks ago that you can search on our class page and see. I think he went through 4 different games. So they must have been on our free test, actually. 4 games from our free tests where he used the circle slash method and how that would work. So I would definitely check that one out. But thanks all for coming. I hope to see you next time or at the D-Min eventually. Have a good one.